Cliff, 30 years ago, if anyone in the Republican Party would have started evoking Hitler and Hitler talking points, the Republican Party would have grabbed them by the nape of the neck, thrown them out in the street, and said, "You're not welcome here." Now, their front runner is basically almost reading verbatim from Mein Kampf. He is, and not only
are they is the blood stuff is verbatim from Mein Kampf,
and the vermin too. Yeah, he's not only are they not calling him to remove himself from the party, but they're belligerently trying to find some way that they can ignore this, and while not condemning it, because they know that there is a substantial part of the party at this point, because of Cheney and Rove welcoming in the extremist far right back under W's administration, that they basically know that if they upset them, they don't have a chance, because they need the racist, the Nazi, they need that vote, and Trump delivers it for them. This is a really bad sign of where this party is at right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's sadly, it was all predictable. I don't feel like I can come up with anything new on this. It's been moving in that direction steadily for a while now. I always like to point to back in 2010 when they had that Tea Party wave, which essentially meant a wave of new racists that were worse than the ones before, who weren't as bad as the new wave of racists that came in 2016 with Trump. How they had that one race in Delaware, to me, that said everything, where they had the candidate who had to go on TV and say, "I'm not a witch," and
that was funny though.
And it was hilarious at the time.
That was an all-timer.
It really was. She was running against what a lot of people didn't know. She was running against Mike Castle, who had been this longtime moderate leader of the Republican Party, governor, congressman, and was running for that Senate seat. And a lot of people didn't know he had led the fight on stem cell research, on things like an assault weapons ban. And he was a direct descendant of Ben Franklin. I don't think you could have it lined up any more perfect. Mike Castle versus this crazy person. And they chose the crazy person in the primary. They'd already been doing that in certain places like Alabama and Utah and far right places. But once they started doing that in Delaware and more moderate states too, you kind of had a hint as to where this was going. And we had people talking about Second Amendment solutions back in 2010, 2012. But this stuff would get news because everybody would be like, I can't believe they just said that. And you made the biggest point of all. This happened, would you say 20 or 30 years ago? We had an example of that, which is some of it not even as directly as Trump, but Pat Buchanan echoed some of that rhetoric at the 1992 Republican convention. And he was all but thrown out of the party. They had to sort of keep him around to keep his people so that George H.W. Bush could try to win. But from then on, they purposely pushed him away and his ilk because they were like, this guy's a Nazi. But in the end, as often happens, like when Goldwater lost, but he really won because his wing took over the party, Pat Buchanan lost that election, but his wing had already infiltrated the party. 2 years later, you had a guy who is completely bereft of principles at all, Newt Gingrich, which I think that was the beginning of the end when he took over the House. That was the first of many clownish figures that have been leaders. Before then, you had Bob Michel, this moderate from Illinois, running, the Republic. I mean, in other words, before that period of time, there were always Jesse Helmses and B1 Bob Dornans and crazy people like that. But the vast majority of Republicans were people whose policies I would say were wrong and often stupid. But they were people that believed in the Constitution, and were at least trying to collaborate in government. After that, everything, that was that first, as they're impeaching Joe Biden now for nothing. They impeached Bill Clinton for nothing when they made sure to manipulate him into a situation to ask him about a sexual affair, which obviously was horrible, and I'm not going to defend, but ask him questions under oath that were asked of no other president, and got him into a position where they could impeach him because they couldn't beat him at the polls. Because the truth of the matter is for 30 years now, it's grown worse and worse, but they've believed less and less in democracy and more in we must protect our white conservative majority, and if we can't win at the polls, we'll do what it takes. And that's the ultimate end of that is January 6th. And now the violence we're seeing inspired by Trump because of the vermin rhetoric and the blood rhetoric. And I was glad to see Jake Tapper on CNN call it straight out, make the comparison and show Mein Kampf next to it. That needs to be done. We have no expectations of Fox, but every news station needs to be doing this kind of stuff constantly so people understand exactly what's going on here.
There seems to be an element of Trump right now, which is the quarterback that loses the last game of his high school career, and he realized he was close, but he just
high school hero, college zero.
Yeah, exactly. just a worthless piece of anyway. But he was at the point where he was about to win. He could have won. He could have done this, and then it just fell apart. And I have zero doubt he was in the Secret Service vehicle trying to turn the vehicle around to go back to the Capitol to try to basically lead.
I think there's so many things we don't know that are even worse than what we do know that he was probably trying to do.
Yeah. So you get this thing. I think that this is his natural state, is that he's crawling deeper into that hole. That he applauds when people attack his enemies. He applauds when people are threatening his enemies. And I have zero doubt if he loses again in 2024, that he's cultivating this army up, because if he's the jilted ex-boyfriend. If you're not going to love me the way I want you to, I want you to love me, well, I'm going to force you to love me. Correct. And I think that that's why you're seeing this real deep dive into Nazi racism, bigotry. He really is going horrible here.
Yeah. Two things. One, it's funny, you said natural state. You made me think so much of, sorry to be a nerd for a second, but like reading political philosophy and Hobbes, because the way Hobbes described the natural state of humans, brutish, short, cruel, the way Trump is literally the embodiment of Hobbes's description of the worst of humans. That's first of all. Second of all, when you're talking about that, I agree, but they've created this politics that again, we talked about the LBJ quote earlier and others, that is so much based on resentment and so much based on, I'm going to hurt myself to hurt you. I'm going to screw my country because it's going to upset the libs. And and they're playing to this part of our lizard brain that sadly never went. I mean, this is caveman stuff. And they're convincing enough people. And the problem is, and I've said this before, that there's a third in any country. Sadly, you saw it with Le Pen. I'm thinking of the original Le Pen way back when it won up to like 35% of the vote there at some point. I'm thinking of other leaders. Hitler got a third of the vote, and then he got thrust in, and they don't get more. There's a natural inclination, it feels like, in democracies for these fascists to be able to, or authoritarians, to attract about a third to 37% or so. The problem is that we have so many holes in our system with the Electoral College and the way our Senate is set up and gerrymandering, and worst of all, their propaganda network and failure of our media is they get that other 15%, and with small parties, 1%. Trump really needs only about 47% to have a shot at winning, maybe 46%. They're able to get that extra 13 or 14% that hate Trump because they're so efficient at exploiting those loopholes and also using their propaganda network to make you think that Joe Biden is every bit as bad. So Hunter Biden this and Hunter Biden that, even though he was never in government, while Ivanka was in government collecting all of her patents from China and everything like that. And so they've turned, and I've had a conversation with a conservative friend of mine, and I just was shocked because he was so anti-Trump and so whatever, but then started on the Hunter Biden stuff. And I was like, dude, he wasn't in government.
There's no there there.
There's no there. And if you want to talk to me about him using his dad's name, I don't know. I've got some names for you. Meghan McCain, Billy Carter, Roger Clinton, Neil Bush, George W. Bush.
The entire Trump family, who probably put Trump name on everything.